has concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today the government has asked the High Court to determine whether the Deputy Prime Minister is constitutionally qualified to be a Member of Parliament. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the Turnbull government is the first government in Australian history that has had to ask the High Court whether, in fact, it has a majority?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you.
Members on my right. The member for Fadden.
And they know it.
The Treasurer.
They know it.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. The High Court has made it very clear that the operation of section 44(1) is not without limits, and that it must be read in light of its purpose and intent, which is to prevent conflicts of loyalty arising among people who are members and senators. Now, if an Australian citizen who became a citizen of this country by reason of being born here was to be ineligible to stand for Parliament because the law of a foreign country imposed foreign citizenship on them without their knowledge, due to their descent from a parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, then plainly millions of Australians could be disqualified from standing for Parliament. Now, based on the advice we have from the Solicitor-General, the government is very confident that the court will not find the member for New England is disqualified from being a member of this House. Very confident indeed. We have not referred the matter to the court because of any lack of confidence in this view. But as I noted in my letter to the Leader of the Opposition today, because we want to give the court the opportunity to clarify the operation of the law in this vitally important area, which goes obviously to the heart of our democracy.
Just before I call the member for Durack, the member for McEwen will cease interjecting. As I made clear earlier today at the beginning of Parliament when the Deputy Prime Minister made his statement, I am going to have a very low tolerance for interjections today. I place everyone on warning. The matters being discussed require me to hear the questions and the answers, and I think members should appreciate that. Also, as Speaker, those interjecting are not just disrupting me from doing my job as Speaker, they're preventing other members from hearing the important matters discussed. The member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the action the government is taking to lower the tax burden on households and businesses, to grow the economy, generate jobs and increase wages? Is the Prime Minister aware of any risks to the government's approach?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for a question. And I recall the visit we made to Broome, where we met with so many small businesses, family businesses, who are already benefiting from our business tax cuts. They have more money in their pocket which they can now invest. You get a better return on investment, you get more investment, and you know what you get, Mr Speaker, with more investment? More jobs. More jobs. Pretty obvious. Mr Speaker, we need tax rates that encourage and incentivise businesses to hire and which reward hard work. All of our economic policies are focused on delivering this: stronger growth, more jobs and higher wages. Stronger growth, more jobs and higher wages. We've reduced taxes for millions of small and medium businesses. We've extended the instant asset write-off. We've stopped more than 500,000 middle-income Australians from entering the second highest tax bracket. And those policies are helping to grow the economy and deliver jobs. Only the other day, the Leader of the Opposition said that we were in a jobless period in the economy. It was a jobless recovery, he said. We've had more than 240,000 new jobs in the last financial year alone. Now, Mr Speaker, most of us here know that the biggest handbrake on economic growth, the biggest risk to jobs and wages, is higher taxes. In fact, before he started to morph into Jeremy Corbyn, the Leader of the Opposition was very good on this subject. He gave speech after speech saying that, if you reduce taxes, you get more investment, you get more jobs. He was right on message. Him and Paul Keating, member for McMahon, they're all on the same song sheet. But now, of course, they've jumped onto the Jeremy Corbyn song sheet. He is the most left-wing leader the Labor Party have had for generations. And the member for Isaacs, that dauntless advocate, that brave barrister, the man you want to have if you're in a bit of trouble. When someone said to him he was complaining about me saying this, and Mr Speaker, a journalist said, who was a more left-wing Labor leader than Bill Shorten? Vacant. Next, he said, next question. He couldn't think of one. The reality is, not for generations have you seen the Labor Party led by someone so determined to smash business, smash investment, undermine jobs. And when he was asked what his economic policy was for driving jobs, when, under a furious interrogation by the right-wing media on Radio National by Fran Kelly, Mr Speaker, when he was asked by Fran what was his policy, he said, we're all in favour of public transport. That's about it. No plan and no jobs.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
My questions to the Prime Minister. Just before question time, the New Zealand Internal Affairs Minister, Peter Dunn, confirmed that the Deputy Prime Minister is a citizen of New Zealand. Now that the government has confirmed that the Deputy Prime Minister is a citizen of New Zealand, how can the Prime Minister possibly defend keeping him in the Cabinet and letting him vote in this House?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And at the risk of inviting the honourable member to get a rundown on constitutional law from his shadow Attorney-General, I refer him to my previous answer, which summarises perfectly the position. The Leader of the National Party, the Deputy Prime Minister, is qualified to sit in this House, and the High Court will so hold.
The member for Groom.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to
Members
the
on
Treasurer.
my left.
Will the Treasurer outline
The member for
to
Groom will begin again. Members on my left. The member for Groom.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House what action the government is taking to keep taxes under control in order to boost our economy? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Groom for his question, because he knows to grow our economy, to support more and better paid jobs, you need to keep taxes as a share of the economy, the tax burden on the Australian economy as low as possible, Mr Speaker. And that's why, as the Prime Minister has just reminded the House, we as a government have cut taxes. The Turnbull government has cut taxes. We have cut small business taxes. We have cut medium-sized business taxes. We have cut personal income taxes. We have cut taxes for entrepreneurs, for innovators, Mr Speaker, for wage earners. And we want to cut taxes for young families who want to save for their first home, Mr Speaker. And we want to ensure that the corporate tax rate in this country is internationally competitive. And we've also put a speed limit on taxes in our budget. We have put, as a share of the economy, a speed limit on taxes to ensure that it does not rise above 23.9% as a share of the economy. Now, that is because, as a government, the Turnbull government believes in the economics of opportunity. The Leader of the Opposition leads a Labor Party that is committed only to the politics of envy, Mr Speaker, and that's why they do not agree with keeping the tax burden low on the Australian economy. Labor will increase the tax burden on the Australian economy by more than $150 billion, Mr Speaker. In in a barrage of taxes, putting up taxes on small business, on medium-sized business, increased taxes on investment, increased taxes on housing, increased taxes on family businesses, increased taxes on superannuation savings and increased personal income taxes. It is an absolute tax blizzard, Mr Speaker, a tax blizzard that will come from a winter of taxes delivered by the Leader of the Opposition if he were ever to become Prime Minister of this country. Freezing growth that is needed for more and better paid jobs. And he will remove the tax speed limit on the budget, Mr Speaker. He will remove it, and even at the last election, we know that on the taxes they announced at the last election, and it's gone a lot worse since then, taxes as a share of the economy will rise to 25.7%. Now, in current year terms, that would be an additional $31 billion on tax burden on the Australian economy. On this side of the House, we believe in the economics of opportunity, Mr Speaker. We believe that on this side of the House, you work hard, you go to work, you invest, you make a better future of yourself. We want a tax system that supports that. You can't pay the bills with the politics of envy.
A member for McMahon.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table a document, the press release in relation to the minister's answer from the Parliamentary Budget Office, which says references in the media this morning to modelling being released today by the Parliament.
Is leave granted? Leave is not granted. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm the government has relied on its one-vote majority to block a Royal Commission into the banks and to block amendments to legislation which would have stopped nearly 700,000 Australians from having their penalty rates cut? There is now doubt over whether the Deputy Prime Minister is constitutionally qualified to sit as a Member of Parliament and exercise a vote in this House. So will the government now rule out accepting the Deputy Prime Minister's vote in this House while his constitutional qualifications are in doubt?
Yeah. The Prime Minister has the call.
For the reasons I have described earlier, that the member for New England is qualified to sit in this House, and based on the advice that we have received, we are very confident indeed that this will be confirmed in the High Court. I repeat, we did not refer this matter to the court because of any doubt about the member for New England's position, but because of the need, plainly, in the public interest, to give the court the opportunity to clarify the operation of this section, so important to the operation of our parliament.
It's the independence question. Just before I call the member for Mayo, can I just take the opportunity to inform the House we have joining us in the gallery today former Senator for the Northern Territory, Nova Peris. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Communications. The Productivity Commission's Telecommunications Universal Service Obligation Report recommends winding back Telstra's obligation to provide payphones. Payphones are a critical form of telecommunication in regional areas. Mayo has more than 130 identified mobile phone black spots. Vast sections of Kangaroo Island and Fleurieu have no coverage. Unemployed Australians rely on payphones to communicate with Centrelink and job-active providers. Will the minister be implementing the recommendation, and if so, how will the government ensure regions with little or no mobile phone coverage and unemployed Australians are not worse off?
The Minister for Urban Infrastructure, representing the Minister for Communications.
Well, I do thank the member for her question and acknowledge her interest in the delivery of communication services to her constituents and, of course, constituents across rural and remote Australia. Clearly, the amount of traffic over payphones has reduced consistently over the years. At the same time, what we are seeing is a greater and greater increase in the amount of traffic occurring over mobile phones and, of course, thanks to the work of this government under the Mobile Black Spots program, a very significant increase in the number of mobile phone base stations around the country and therefore the number of people who are able to obtain coverage obtain mobile coverage.
The government continues to work on its policies in relation to regional communications, and particularly the Mobile Black Spots program, and through this and the universal service obligation and the other policy directions of the government, we are continuing to ensure that the best possible communication services can be provided in regional Australia.
The minister's concluded his answer. I know the member for Mayo was about to seek a point of order. The member for Capricornia has the call.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Agriculture, Water Resources and Northern Australia.
The member for Capricornia will resume her seat. Member for Capricornia will resume her seat. Member for Capricornia will resume her seat. The member for Sydney is warned, as is the member for Gellibrand. I refer members to my earlier statement. I will start lowering the volume if this persists. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I want to raise two matters with you, one with respect to practice and one with respect to a resolution carried by the House earlier today. Page 47 of practice makes clear that Section 64 further provides that after the first general election, no Minister of State can hold office for a longer period than 3 months unless he or she is or becomes a senator or a member of the House of Representatives. Earlier today, the House unanimously resolved to refer to the High Court A, whether by reason of Section 44(1) of the Constitution the place of the member of New England, Mr Joyce, has become vacant. In a circumstance where the House has unanimously resolved that we do not know whether or not he has the qualifications required to hold office as a minister in this government, he should not be here on the floor answering questions.
I was ready to rule, but given the issues at stake, I do want to hear from the Leader of the House. I don't want to cut him off.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, until such a time as the High Court decides otherwise, the member for New England,
on my left,
the member for New England is duly elected and therefore has every right to sit in the House unless his status is chosen to be different by the High Court.
Leader of the House
as a consequence, he can be the deputy.
Leader of the House can resume. The member for Grayndler is warned. I've listened very carefully to the Manager of Opposition Business. The House passed a resolution referring the matter to the High Court. The High Court will determine the matter. If the High Court determines that there is a vacancy, that's when that occurs, not when the Manager of Opposition Business raises a point of order. The member for Capricornia needs to ask the question again because I could not hear it.
Thank you. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Agriculture, Water Resources and Northern Australia. Will the Deputy Prime Minister outline to the House how the government is growing Australia's economy by backing our $63 billion agriculture sector? What effect will alternative policies have on jobs and cost of living across regional Australia, particularly my electorate of Capricornia?
Great question. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question.
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Moreton will leave under 94A. I'm not proceeding until he's left, so I'm quite patient anyway. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
I move that the member be no longer heard.
The Manager of Opposition Business has moved that the member be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. I think the noes have it. Division required. Ring the bells. For 4 minutes. Lock the doors. The question is that the member be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Macarthur and Lawler tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Murray and Gray tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 66, noes 75. The question is therefore negatived. Members just take their seats. Member for Hunter resume his seat, please. Members can take their seats as quickly as possible. I'll resume question time once everyone's taken their seat. Member for Melbourne Ports. Member for Melbourne Ports. The Deputy Prime Minister in continuation.
Well, I thank you
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. The members on my right, the Manager of Opposition Business. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, I refer you to page 528 of practice. Page 528 of practice makes clear that if there is a division, or if there is a point of order or a motion of dissent, that there will be a pause in the clock. But it does not say that such a thing should happen where you have a procedural motion such as the House has just dealt with.
The difficulty the Manager of Opposition Business has is he first jumped on a point of order. No, the Manager of Opposition Business did because he asked whether the member should be able to do certain things in wake of the resolution that had been put, and I ruled on that point of order after hearing him and the Leader of the House. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business again.
Mr Speaker, there were two moments when I rose.
Yes.
The first time I rose was when the question was commenced and it was to the Deputy Prime Minister. You made a ruling. I resumed my seat. You made a ruling. You then asked the questioner to complete the question. The questioner completed the question. The Deputy Prime Minister stood up. At that point, I rose to my feet again. It was well after I dealt with the point of order and you had ruled on it. And the only thing that I did was move that the member be no longer heard.
Okay. If the Manager of Opposition Business just returns to his seat, the clock wasn't stopped because that has been the practice. We have time limits on, and if members on both sides can just hear me on this, and on some matters I'm happy to be in your hands, to be honest. We have time limits on both questions and answers. That's been the practice in the past with respect to questions. It's completely different with respect to other motions that are moved. I'm happy to be corrected, but my recollection is these motions were moved in the 43rd Parliament, certainly, and that's been the practice. Now, when it comes to question time, I'm going to remind members on another matter in a second, but that has been the practice. If members feel that strongly about it, that they think that the clock should have kept running, and that's frankly a device they want to use, I just caution them that that device cuts both ways. It really does. And can I also point out, of course, that, and I know the Manager of Opposition Business well knows this, but the motion he moved during question time is not often moved during question time. It can be moved on a minister giving an answer. Can I also just say, for the interest of clarity, equally it can be moved by a government minister on anyone asking a question. My interest is in free-flowing debate. I've always made that clear, So I'm just saying be careful what you'd wish for. My view is the Deputy Prime Minister, having had that motion moved and the House having determined it and negatived it, I think it is an unreasonable restriction not to allow him to resume. That's my view, and I think that should be the practice of the House. That's my view. The Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank you very much for that, and I thank the honourable member for a question. And I say that our agricultural production has grown incredibly under this coalition government. In fact, by about 29% since we've been the government. And we continue to work so hard, and Queensland's gross value of ag production has grown by 19%. Agriculture under the coalition government has been one of the great success stories of this government, and we have brought the money back into our nation. And we continue to work for our nation in the building of massive infrastructure. It's very important that we understand the Inland Rail. The Inland Rail, a corridor of commerce from Melbourne up to Brisbane, through the inland, through Seymour, Wodonga, Parkes, Narrabri, Moree, Gundawindi. This gives the capacity for our nation to grow even further. What we note as well is that as it grows, it has the capacity for people to have greater opportunities out in regional areas. We also note that the Labor Party, though, on the other side, have no intention of building Inland Rail. They've put no money towards Inland Rail, as close as they can get, to say it's a good idea. We also stand behind Rookwood Weir. Rookwood Weir is terribly important to the member for Capricornia and the member for Flynn. We put $130 million on the table for that. And the Labor Party, has, because they just want green votes, is willing to flush Central Queensland down the toilet. They don't believe in Central Queensland. They don't believe in the coal miners in Central Queensland. They don't believe in the cattle producers in Central Queensland. They don't believe in the dams for Central Queensland. They believe in nothing for Central Queensland. As close as we have got, when we asked the Leader of the Opposition to go to Central Queensland, what does he offer the member for Capricornia? Public transport. Public transport. A new light rail for Alpha. I don't know what we're going to have. A new ferry across the Fitzroy River. That's about as close as we get of anything positive from the Labor Party that used to represent labourers, that once upon a time represent labourers, but they don't represent labourers anymore. No labourers over there anymore. So they've given up on labourers, and that's a shame, because up in Townsville, with unemployment, youth unemployment near 20%, what does the member of Townsville do for North Queensland? When's she going to stand up for North Queensland? When's she going to stand up for her people? When's she going to go into bat? When's she going to stand up for the Galilee Basin? When's she going to get that coal mine over? Of course she won't. The Labor Party have nothing to say for jobs in this chamber. They have nothing but this peculiar art form, but parliamentary tactics. Why don't you start standing up for jobs? And while you're at it, we see the new taxes you're bringing in, $130 billion in taxes, and family trust. Family trust, what are they going to tax? What are these going to tax? And let's see who's got a family trust in the Labor Party. Well, the member for Sydney's got a family trust. The member for Batman's got a family trust. The member for Gellibrand's got a family trust. The member for Burt's has got the trust. The member for Wills, the member for Longman. Well, a lot of people who apparently the Labor Party don't believe in their own side.
Concluded. The member for Lingiari will withdraw.
But I just suggest
the member for Lingiari will now withdraw from the chamber under 94A. The Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Moments ago, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Mr Bill English, has confirmed, unwittingly or not, the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia is a New Zealand citizen. So I ask again, how can the Prime Minister possibly defend keeping him in his cabinet and letting him vote in the House?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition has asked me this question before today, and I refer him to my earlier answer.
The member for Chisholm.
My question is to the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services. Will the minister update the House on the importance of creating a tax setting that helps grow the economy and reduces the tax burden on hard-working Australians? Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches that pose a threat to Australian small businesses and families alike, including in my electorate of Chisholm?
Good question.
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I very much thank the member for Chisholm for her question. She is, in fact, one of the hardest-working members of this place and represents her community, particularly all of those small businesses in Chisholm, so very well. She understands the importance of getting the economic and tax settings right to help drive small businesses in our community and to help generate even more jobs throughout our community. The government is committed to reducing the tax burden on hard-working Australians because we know that lower taxes help to grow the economy, to generate jobs and to increase wages. We want to put more money back in the pockets of hard-working Australians. That's why we have cut taxes for small and medium-sized companies, and we will go even further. By reducing the company tax rate to 25% for all businesses, we estimate that that will put back $750 into the pockets of workers and grow the economy by an extra $17 billion every single year. We have cut personal income tax. We have stopped more than 500,000 middle-income Australians from entering the second highest tax bracket, and we have given a tax cut to an estimated 3.1 million Australians in 2016-17. We know that lower taxes help to grow the economy, to generate jobs and to increase wages. And the Turnbull government has today recommitted to lowering taxes. We will not allow our tax revenue to rise any higher than 23.9% of our economy over the next 10 years. By contrast, though, the Leader of the Opposition wants to slug Australians even more when it comes to taxes, $150 billion more of taxes. For any Australian who is listening to this, Labor wants to increase the tax slug on your pay packet, on your home, on your electricity, on your small business and on your investments. It seems that the Leader of the Opposition is channelling the former Treasurer Wayne Swan, the member for Lilley, with his Australia-wide tax grab based on the politics of envy. Indeed, it was reported in last Monday's Labor caucus meeting that the Leader of the Opposition singled out the member for Lilley for his great work and early thinking in this space after his recent trip to the United States, meeting with none other than Bernie Sanders. This is the same Bernie Sanders who is known for wanting to nationalise the banks, for shutting down private health insurance and pharmaceutical companies, and who hasn't seen a tax hike that he doesn't like, and someone who gushes about Fidel Castro. Those on that side of the House want to hike the taxes on ordinary Australians. We will protect them.
Has concluded. The member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What is the difference between the legal advice received with respect to Senator Canavan and the legal advice received with respect of the Deputy Prime Minister? How is it that Senator Canavan has had to step aside and the Deputy Prime Minister is still here, and will he table the advice?
Hear, hear. Just before I call the Prime Minister, we've had obviously a very free-flowing debate on this subject. I am going to call the Prime Minister, but I just remind members I'm just cautious, obviously, about that balance between free-flowing debate and the standing orders that prohibit requests for legal opinions. Many speakers— I don't need any interjections, okay? I really don't. The member for Franklin can leave under 94A. But given there's been discussions of these matters through both questions and answers today, I'm going to allow the question, but it's very near to being ruled out by me, and can I say many other speakers would have ruled it out. I'm just saying that in fairness. The Prime Minister has the call.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Speaker. You've already referred to the standing orders about
requesting legal advice, and the honourable member understands that the government does not provide the legal advice that it has received. As far as the substance of the matter, I refer the honourable member to my earlier answers.
The member for Goldstein.
My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment. Will the minister outline to the House why it is important that the leaders of unions always act in the best interests of their members, particularly ensuring that proper processes for consultation are followed? Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Goldstein for his question, and I agree with the member for Goldstein that it's critically important that union members know how their funds are being expended. I mean, imagine if a union gave $100,000 to an organisation like GetUp, for example, like the GetUp organisation, in start-up capital that came from a union like, for example, the AWU. You'd think union members would want to know that proper processes were being followed in that $100,000 donation, Mr Speaker. But surprisingly to me, it just so happens that such a donation was made by the AWU when, guess who, our old friend over here was the National Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union. $100,000 was given by the AWU to the GetUp organisation, an independent, progressive, community-based organisation, in start-up capital in 2005 to get them underway, Mr Speaker. But the Leader of the Opposition has refused to answer any questions from the Fourth Estate about whether the rules of the union were followed. And it's equally surprising the member for Goldstein will be just as shocked that when the AWU's been asked about this, they can't find the minutes. Seems unusual, doesn't it? In 2005, they can't find the minutes of AWU National Executive meetings, and under the rules of the union, the National Executive is supposed to sign off on donations like this. But maybe it's like a dog ate my homework kind of example, Mr Speaker, where the Leader of the Opposition can't find the minutes and neither can his former mates. And I'm sure it's not related. It would be absolutely a coincidence that not long after this donation from the AWU, a company with a close association to the Leader of the Opposition gave GetUp a $50,000 donation to tide them over. And guess who? Guess who? Our old friends at Clean Event. Our old friends at Clean Event, Mr Speaker. Clean Event, the AWU, all supporting the GetUp organisation to get them underway, Mr Speaker. What emerges is a very tangled web between GetUp, the AWU, companies like Clean Event, other companies like other unions like the CFMEU, all for one purpose: to stand up a supposedly independent, progressive community organisation, which we know now is nothing but a front for the ALP, a front that is used to campaign against members of the coalition. It's high time the Leader of the Opposition came clean about how this donation of $100,000 came into being of his union's members. He gave their money away to help start GetUp. He needs to explain if the rules were followed.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that he governs in this House with a majority of one, that he has formed that majority based on a secret personal deal with the Deputy Prime Minister, that he's allowing the Deputy Prime Minister to remain in office based on secret advice, even though the House has unanimously referred the question of his qualifications to be a Member of Parliament to the High Court? Prime Minister, how can the Australian people have confidence in the legitimacy of this government if it's based on a secret agreement and clinging to office on secret advice?
The Leader of the House on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, that is a question that is simply a smear and a sneer against the government.
Members on my left, Leader of the House, resume his seat. The member for Lindsay will leave under 94A. The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. I'm trying to hear the Leader of the Opposition and members on my left preventing that occurring. The Leader of the House, I should say.
Mr Speaker.
And I'll hear the Leader of the Opposition. If members on my left want to keep interjecting, they're just going to delay question time and they're going to have less questions to ask. That's just an obvious consequence. So the member for Bendigo might find it hysterical, but I'm not sure the manager of opposition business will. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, the question does not seek any information from the Prime Minister. It is simply a collection of assertions and smears and therefore is not in order.
The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the Manager of Opposition Business from moving the following motion forthwith. That the House 1 notes that today this House unanimously asked the High Court to determine whether the Deputy Prime Minister is constitutionally qualified to be a Member of Parliament. B. The New Zealand government has since confirmed that the Deputy Prime Minister is a New Zealand citizen, despite the Prime Minister's assurances on this matter. C. The government has relied on the vote of the Deputy Prime Minister to block a Royal Commission into the banks and to block amendments to legislation which would have prevented nearly 700,000 Australians from having their penalty rates cut. And D. The former Minister for Resources in Northern Australia resigned from Cabinet because there were doubts over his constitutional qualifications. And 2. Therefore, calls on the Prime Minister to A. Release any legal advice it has received about the constitutional qualifications of the Deputy Prime Minister, B. Rule out accepting the vote of the Deputy Prime Minister while his constitutional qualifications are in doubt, and C. Direct the Deputy Prime Minister to immediately resign from Cabinet. This is a government without legitimacy. This is a government that has had to, for the first time in the history of this country, go to the High Court and ask whether or not it in fact has a majority. We've never had a government before, ever since Federation, that has had to go to the High Court because they just weren't sure if they had a majority or not. We just had an alleged lecture from the Leader of the House talking about lawlessness. Talk about lawlessness! We've got someone in the role of Deputy Prime Minister and we're not even sure if he's meant to be a Member of Parliament. We're not even sure if he's been legally, lawfully elected. And what's the test meant to be? Whether or not he's also a citizen of New Zealand. And what does the government of New Zealand say? Yes, he is. You've got the most senior people in New Zealand saying they know the answer to this. See, don't forget, with Senator Canavan, we were told before, and Senator Canavan's the one who was made to stand aside. Now, when he had to stand aside, he said, but I intend to check whether or not this has happened lawfully under Italian law, because he believed there was doubt under Italian law as to whether he was in fact a citizen. Well, we've now got the Prime Minister of New Zealand saying, no, there's no question, unwittingly or not, he might not have meant to do it, but he is a citizen of New Zealand. You know, this could have been handled completely differently today. There was an opportunity for the government today to be able to have the Deputy Prime Minister stand aside. There's an opportunity for the government to be able to prioritise in terms of divisions while this matter is being resolved, issues where they're not relying on a majority of one. But no, that's not how they operate. That's not how a Prime Minister who will say anything and do anything to be in office operates. Because what they're willing to do now is say, who cares what the Constitution says? Who cares about the risk that we might be having ministerial decisions made by somebody that aren't in fact lawful, that aren't in fact allowed under the Constitution? We just reckon we'll get away with it. And the extraordinary thing earlier today, right at the beginning of question time, to have the Prime Minister tell the High Court what it would decide. What extraordinary words! Not we are confident, not we are confident, but to have the situation where the Prime Minister is telling, through his office of Prime Minister, telling the High Court what its conclusion will be. Now, the Labor Party, I can say, we are confident every member of the Labor caucus has been properly elected. We have processes which we have had in place that go back to grandparents, making sure that wherever citizenship needs to be renounced, that the full requirements of the Constitution are taken into place. But this is the Prime Minister. Remember his description of the Greens. Remember what he was saying when the Greens first declared that they, the Green Party, that they had made mistakes of this nature. And he was talking about extraordinary recklessness on their part, about how hopeless they were. Well, Prime Minister, every criticism you made about the Greens is now about you. Every single word you said about that party, it's now about the Prime Minister himself. Senator Canavan, imagine how that poor bloke feels right now. If only the coalition agreement had been signed with him, he'd still be in the job. If only he'd been in the House of Representatives as a critical vote, he'd still be in the job. Because if you think about what's the difference between Senator Canavan's situation and the Deputy Prime Minister's situation, Senator Canavan says he had no way of knowing that this could have happened. It was done by others around him. He couldn't have known. According to what the Deputy Prime Minister said today, every single fact is based on something he's known all his life. All the facts that have led the New Zealand government to make this decision aren't based on an additional application. They're based on facts the Deputy Prime Minister has known all his life. And yet the protection racket kicks in. And yet we end up having a government that will mock other parties, have a reference for their own people in the Senate, which isn't quite the threshold that everyone else gets held to, but then when it comes to the vote that this man needs to continue to be Prime Minister of Australia, at that moment every principle is out the window. At the moment that it's— if only— there's Australians all around the country in a series of industries, in the automotive industry, in shopping complexes, at restaurants, and they're all saying, if only he fought for their jobs as tough as he's now fighting for his own. If only he would care and put as much commitment into fighting for the jobs of Australians as he's putting in today for his own job. We have a situation where the Prime Minister— this is what he said with respect to the Green Party. He said, those two senators knew exactly what the rules are. Apparently the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia hadn't heard about this constitution document. And then he went on to say, why they wouldn't have turned their mind to it and dealt with it is beyond me. Well, Prime Minister, a few things. First of all, if the Prime Minister really believed those words, then how on earth can he think this is the human being who should be his second in charge? If he actually believes any of the words he spoke when he thought the only people at stake were members of the Green Party, how on earth can he now be in a situation where he's willing to accept somebody who has acted with that same degree of recklessness and make that person Deputy Prime Minister? And there's only one reason why he'll do it. There's only one reason why this Prime Minister will make all these concessions, because it's contingent on him keeping his job. That's what it's about. Think of all the times this House has divided and the government has held on by a majority of one. Think of the times when every member of the crossbench has lined up on the same side as the Labor opposition, and the outcome for Australia could have been different. And yet, it's not even that they're not only unwilling to say, well, we won't accept his vote, they're not even willing to say, while this is being resolved, he won't get his salary. Every dollar of the salary has to survive during this period where the parliament has voted unanimously that we don't know whether he's allowed to be here. Yeah, this isn't like Labor did some deal and someone crossed the floor and we just got it over the line. The Leader of the House came in here today and moved it. It was carried unanimously in this House. This House has resolved for the first time in its history that we don't know whether or not this government has a majority. And the Prime Minister reckons it's business as usual. Well, let me tell you, Prime Minister, it's not business as usual for the victims of the banks who've been held back by the way you've hung on to that majority of one. It's not business as usual for the Australians who've taken a pay cut as their penalty rates were taken from them when this parliament tried to fix it. What this government is doing is accepting that it doesn't know whether or not it's acting lawfully, but keeping its job anyway. They need to release the advice as to why the situation for Senator Canavan is different to the situation for the member for New England. Senator Canavan may or may not be a senator. The member for New England may not really be the member for New England. But the other thing we don't know this government may or may not have a majority, and yet it thinks it can govern anyway, and the Australian people won't notice. The Australian people aren't going to miss today. The Australian people aren't going to let today be something that just slips their mind, didn't flick the news on. Today was the day that the parliament resolved it didn't know whether or not this government had a majority, and the Prime Minister was determined to cling to power whether it was legal or not.
Is the motion seconded?
Mr. Speaker.
The member for Hunter, sorry. Motion seconded?
It is, Mr. Speaker. Not without cause, I've often said that the Deputy Prime Minister is all hat, no cowboy. And now we are entitled to even question his right to wear the hat. We've known of the secret coalition deal for some time, but now, after 10 years, we learn of the secret citizen. Australia, Mr. Deputy Speaker, currently has an illegitimate agriculture minister. It has an illegitimate Deputy Prime Minister. It has an illegitimate resource minister, an illegitimate water minister, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and an illegitimate minister for Northern Australia, all allegedly some of the Prime Minister's key interests. Minister Canavan must be feeling pretty sad for himself today. No doubt Minister Canavan thought he was doing a pretty good job. We had a slightly different view about that, but certainly Minister Canavan thought he was part of a cabinet which liked him and supported him. You know, he is, of course, a protege of the Deputy Prime Minister. He was entitled to believe the Deputy Prime Minister, and indeed the Prime Minister, might have stood beside him in his hour of need, but it wasn't the case, Mr. Prime Minister. It wasn't the case. Dispatched on the moment of confession. But it's a different case, a different story in the case of the Deputy Prime Minister. And why is that so, Mr. Speaker? Why is that so? Well, there's one simple reason. They're called the numbers in the House of Representatives. That is the difference between Senator Canavan and, of course, the Deputy Prime Minister, who continues to sit in the House today with every intention of continuing to exercise his vote on behalf of the Australian community. Now, I could take up a lot of my time, Mr. Speaker, reflecting on the poor performance of this minister over the course of the last 4 years. Everywhere I travel in this country, they're saying the same thing. After building expectation—
Member for Hunter will just resume his seat for a second. The motion is to suspend standing orders, and the member for Hunter needs to speak to why the standing order should be suspended. Can I say that I give a lot of latitude on these motions, but he's now straying beyond why standing orders should be suspended.
Well, obviously, it's urgent that standing orders be suspended because we have a Deputy Prime Minister sitting in this chamber with us now with every intention, with the imprimatur of his Prime Minister, to exercise his vote in this place illegitimately, certainly under a cloud, until the High Court makes its determination, a determination referred by his own Prime Minister. And as the Manager of Opposition Business said earlier today, you don't refer the matter if you're sure of the answer. You refer the matter if you're unsure of the answer. But everywhere I go, and this is the urgency out there in the Australian community, Mr. Speaker, and the reason this motion is urgent today, because, as I said, I'm not going to spend too much time reflecting on their disappointment in this minister's past performances. What they're more concerned about today is what the future looks like, whether they are going to be represented now by a minister who has the legal capacity to represent their interests, who over the coming months will be making decisions on each of those portfolios which are critical to their interests, and of course their interests are also the Australian interests. Now, we recently had, Mr. Speaker, an outbreak of white spot disease in the prawn sector. When we have these biosecurity risks emerge, we need someone on the watch, someone on the job with the power to legitimately deal with these issues in a legally binding way. And all those out there in the agriculture, fisheries and forestry sector are asking themselves whether they have such a person on that watch. As we speak, there are boats sitting off the coast of China with frozen beef on board because they have been denied access to the China market. When these things occur, they need to know, Prime Minister, they have an agriculture minister on watch who's able to deal with these issues in a full legal capacity, and those exporters of that beef today will be asking themselves whether, one, they have a minister representing them with that legal capacity, and two, whether they have a minister who is taken seriously in China and in other export markets. Do you really believe, Prime Minister, we are on a level playing field when you have an illegitimate minister negotiation with trading partners when our exports are blocked off coast? Now, the Deputy Prime Minister, indeed you, Prime Minister, are very fond of talking about the beef sector. He illegitimately again takes credit for higher beef prices. We know how funny that must be to the cockies out there, the producers out there. But what we do need, Prime Minister, is someone who's taken seriously on export markets. And in this Deputy Prime Minister, this minister, we certainly have no such person.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm sorry to say the member for Hunter was even worse than the member for Isaacs usually is, which is really pushing the boat out there, Mr Speaker. Well, Mr Speaker, fancy the chutzpah of the Labor Party to come into this chamber and lecture the Liberal and National parties about parliamentary ethics. In the 43rd Parliament, Mr Speaker, the Labor Party were the party that supported Peter Slipper, the member for Fisher, that stuck the knife into Harry Jenkins, the former member for Scullin, to get him out of the chair as Speaker, to slip Peter Slipper into the Speaker's chair in order to deny the coalition a vote on the House of Representatives. It was a disgraceful and ruthless act of realpolitik, and didn't that end well? Didn't that end well, Mr Speaker? That was the record of the Labor Party in office when they thought they had the chance. They didn't think for 1 minute about the right way to behave in this place. But that's not even the worst example of the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. That's not even the worst example, because the Labor Party spent 3 years supporting the member for Dobell, Craig Thomson, in this place, taking his vote in this House when we had refused to take his vote in the opposition, Mr Speaker. The member for Dobell was backed in by the Labor Party in a disgraceful protection racket in order to save the skin of Julia Gillard, the then Prime Minister of Australia, and the person who sidled up to Craig Thomson, supported him, was the current Leader of the Opposition, the member for Maribyrnong, Mr Speaker. So for the Labor Party to come in here and lecture the coalition, who has done the right thing, by the government, by the people of Australia, for them to lecture us when we are behaving ethically in every respect on every part of this journey, we have done the right thing, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister has made it absolutely clear in the House and elsewhere that we are totally confident of the status of the member for New England, and that is the very clear advice of the Solicitor General, nobody has sought to impugn the Solicitor General's reputation, Mr Speaker. It is absolutely clear, however, that this area of the law needs to be clarified. This area of the law under section 44(1) needs to be clarified, Mr Speaker. So what the government has decided to do is, on the request of the Deputy Prime Minister, refer this matter to the High Court to get a very clear ruling from the High Court about what section 44(1) means, in the modern era, particularly with respect to citizenship gained by dissent, Mr Speaker. So we have done the right thing, and yet Labor comes in here and thinks they can lecture the government about us taking the right course of action to ensure that in the public interest people have absolute confidence in how the Constitution works, because this government is the adult in the room, Mr Speaker. This government is the adult in the room, where the Leader of the Opposition and the Labor Party keep playing old politics. This government is the one that's getting on with dealing with issues like low wages, creating jobs, growing investment in the economy, reducing inflation, keeping interest rates low, balancing the budget. That's what sensible governments do. Welfare reform, the economics of opportunity, Mr Speaker, while all the opposition does is play politics day in and day out, and that's why the public are thoroughly sick of it, Mr Speaker. They are thoroughly sick of it, and that's why they continue to support this Prime Minister over the Leader of the Opposition every day of the week. Now, taken to its logical conclusion, Mr Speaker, if you take the managed opposition business's logic to its logical conclusion, if a member who was referred to the High Court in the circumstances of the Deputy Prime Minister could no longer sit in the Parliament
until the High Court decided the outcome of that application. The government could use its numbers any time it wished to refer any member of the Labor Party to the High Court if they chose to do so. In fact, I'm sure if the Labor Party had that kind of power and the shoe was on the other foot, that's exactly what they would do. But taken to its logical conclusion, if the government was unsure of winning a vote, we would simply refer one of the members of the opposition to the High Court and ask the High Court to determine their status, and until the High Court got around to it, we say they couldn't vote in the chamber. Now, I mean, that might work in third world Stalinist countries from which many of the Labor members draw their political inspiration. But it doesn't work in a democracy like ours, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we will not be supporting this suspension of standing orders, because the government, the adult in the room, is getting on with the business of government, and that's what the public expect and want us to do, Mr. Speaker. The other reason we're not going to be lectured by the Labor Party about this matter, Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister wrote to the Leader of the Opposition today, and in his letter he said to the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of cases already referred by the Senate, and so it would be helpful if all relevant matters could be heard by the court at the same time. In other words, for members on the other side of the House over whom there may be a cloud, we would be quite keen to refer them to the High Court
Member
for
for
determination.
Isaacs.
And I've been asked to name them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Well, I will. The member for Braddon, for example. The member for Braddon, Mr. Speaker. The member for Braddon has a much worse case than Senator Malcolm Roberts. The only difference between the member for Braddon's status in this House as a UK citizen and the Senator Malcolm Roberts, Mr. Speaker, the only difference is the matter of months it took for the UK to write saying that both he and she were not citizens of the UK. But on election day, Mr. Speaker, neither of them had renounced their citizenship to the United Kingdom. And the only difference between the member for Braddon and Senator Malcolm Roberts is a matter of months. That is the only material difference, Mr. Speaker. And there are others, Mr. Speaker. It surprises me, for example, that if members on that side of the House had evidence of their of renouncing their citizenship, why they would not be providing it to the media. I understand the Courier-Mail is asking the member for Longman, on many occasions to prove that she has renounced her UK citizenship. She has refused to do so. If the member for Longman has absolutely nothing to fear, why doesn't she release the evidence that shows that she renounced her citizenship? Or the member for Macon, Mr. Speaker. The member for Macon has been asked time and again by the press to show how he's renounced his citizenship. Now he says that he has. But where is the evidence that the member for Macon has renounced his citizenship? It was OK for the member for Cowan to produce her evidence. The member for Cowan, who had the potential to be an Egyptian citizen, she produced the evidence which showed that she had renounced her citizenship. She's done the right thing. So it's good enough for the member for Cowan. Why isn't it good enough for the member for Macon, or the member for Longman, or in fact the member for Braddon, who is in a worse position than Senator Malcolm Roberts? And I understand the member for Caldwell. The member for Caldwell has also been asked to produce her evidence to show that she is no longer a Greek citizen. Now, they all claim, Mr. Speaker, that they're not. But if in fact they had this evidence, which is apparently clearly able to be obtained, why haven't they produced it for the general public, Mr. Speaker? And if the government decided to refer those members to the High Court to seek clarity about their status, would we insist they not be allowed to vote in the House of Representatives until justice had been able to take its course? Of course we wouldn't. Of course we wouldn't. We'd expect their status to be resolved by the High Court, and once resolved, they would be able to continue to do exactly what they'd done before, unless they were found to have been disqualified. So, and there are many more, Mr. Speaker. There are many more. And if Labor wants to open this Pandora's box, well, that is a matter for them, but the reality is there are more, and they need to prove that they are not disqualified from sitting in the House of Representatives before they start to criticise the government for being the ones that did the right thing and recognised that this was an area that needed to be clarified by the High Court under section 44(1) for us to be able to have full confidence that the Constitution is fit for purpose. And that's what the public expect us to do, Mr Speaker, to get on with the job. When an issue is raised, to deal with it maturely, calmly, sensibly, while all the time the Cabinet and the rest of the Parliament on this side of the House is serving the interests of the people, creating jobs, building investment, supporting local communities. That's exactly what we're going to continue to do, and we're going to vote against the suspension of standing orders because we want to deal with the Minister for Immigration's citizenship laws, which is much more important than pathetic political point scoring from the Labor Party.
The member's time has concluded and the time allotted for this debate has concluded as well. The question is that the motion to suspend standing orders moved by the Manager of Opposition Business be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the noes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Member for McEwen. Lock the doors. Order. The question is that the motion moved by the Manager of Opposition Business to suspend standing orders be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for MacArthur and Lawler tell us for the ayes, and the honourable members for Murray and Gray tell us for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 68, noes 73. The question is therefore negatived. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister. The